well, this is our Junkanoo. But what is interesting with this image is look at the fluidity of the people, even though they're sat on bleachers, which someone you can speak to it. We used to be able to stand with the crowd, and that used to be a little bit more fun. But you can still see there is more interactivity than the separation here, right? And so what is happening in that moment, that juxtaposition of the two? Yes, Junkanoo is deeply rooted in our tradition, and yes, there are ties there, but we also have Junkanoo Protocol, which was introduced in, 2016, and there you also see a similar interaction of bodies in the fact that they are there. You see a wide variety of persons, locals, you see tourists, you see the elderly, you see young people. Why aren't we seeing them here? And so really, this is the spaces, this is the kind of the duality that we have here. We know it, high art, popular art, the fact that we have a certain demographic, a certain crowd that continues to come to the museum space in the formal openings, right? Where we rub shoulders with people we always know that come to these openings, right? There's a certain level of familiarity, a certain level of elitism as well that is tied to that institution that I feel often excludes the general public. And so here we have a video. I hope it plays really quickly. I'll show a minute of it. It's essentially a project by the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas where they factor in the limitations of having a national museum in the capital and being able to service the archipelago, the other islands within the country. So let's hope this plays. My IT guy is looking at me like, you're gonna do it, you're gonna do it. And that is not doing it. Oh, there's parking. So I leave it there because I think I'll mess up if I make it bigger. Make it bigger. He says make it bigger.
So the Inter-Island Traveling Exhibition, or the ITE, as we like to call it, it started as a joint effort between myself and the then education officer, Addie Smith, and very, very, very graciously supported by Director Amanda Colson and our then Chief Curator, Holly Bino. The ITE has been devised as a way for us to ensure that we include the family islands when we're having national conversations about art. And you can't know what's going on culturally if you don't get to see your cultural patrimony. So the ITE is a way for us to take the national collection to the nation.
So the ITE has visited Grand Bahama, Abaco, Eleuthera, Andros, Exuma, and Long Island. And some of those islands we've been to more than once. So we usually make 2 trips a year, one earlier in the year and one later in the year. And the pandemic has shifted that slightly, which meant that we haven't been able to do this in person. So the most recent in-person Inter-Island Traveling Exhibition was in Eleuthera, and that was almost a year ago. That was last year, March. So whenever we travel to the ITE, the curatorial and education teams hit the ground running, and it's an intense week of programming. We have school visits where we visit the schools and teach them about the museum and different career paths in the arts. We have the student workshops where we introduce students to some Bahamian artists, and then we do an art activity with them. We have the exhibition opening, which is sort of the culmination of the long week of activities and an opportunity for the community to come in to see the exhibition that the curatorial team has installed. We also have student workshops where we introduce students to a more artistic technique and introduce them also to some Bahamian artists. We also have some version of a talk, whether that's a curator's talk, an artist talk, a talk with environmentalists, basically a talk to involve the community, engage the community, because they're the ones who have stake in the island and that's their home. And at the end of the week is when we have our community workshop, which is when we get to unwind a little bit, have some fun with the community. This is where we get to spend some more time with them, get to know them, and end everything on a high note, and just have some fun.
The ITE is a team endeavor, and everyone here pitches in to make sure it's a success twice a year. the importance of which cannot be overstated. The ITE impacts hundreds of students and adults across the Family Islands when they engage with the arts in tangible and impactful ways, viewing our national collection and creating works of art themselves.
I'm gonna pause it there. Sorry, like a extra arm I have. And so what we see there is a really good example, and I know for many of you the programming may seem familiar because it's what you do in a typical museum, you engage your public, but like I said, this is an archipelago of islands that they're traveling to, so this is a colossal endeavor, so yes, they can only afford to do it twice a year. But I don't know if you heard in the video where they're talking about the different types of people that they're considering engaging, not just the students, they have adults being engaged, and you probably didn't get to that part of the video. They engage the elderly, but they have different forms of engagement, and that as well is important. And then former education officer Blake Fox talks about how it was important to create meaningful relationships, because oftentimes we go into these communities and it's just very ephemeral, and there's no sense of like a genuine kind of connection, and oftentimes the community feels that. They're like, we're just kind of in transit, and establishing meaningful relationships is important. So for me, because I know you're like, we come here to talk about the archive, she talked about the archive, yes. But this is my research in really decentering the archive. It began in 2021, and I was at the Clark Art Institute in Massachusetts doing a fellowship there, and I was interested in looking at the foundation of the formal education system here in the Bahamas in the 1950s, 1960s, that currently only appears as a footnote in our history, right? We know of Horace K. Wright, 2 sentences, maybe a paragraph. We know about Donald Russell, we don't even know how he looks. So my research was really interested in going to a place, and it sounds ridiculous, going abroad to find out more about who I am than I can right here at home. And so this is really the conundrum for me. And so I here have looked at these 3 national institutions, the National Gallery of the Bahamas, the University of the Bahamas, and the Bahamas National Archives. And so I'm just going to go through my findings, and bear in mind these findings are under the purview of 1950s art educators. I'm looking for 3 people specifically, but any relationships that may have kind of emerged during that time, because they too tell the story. So here we have, within the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas, I found 51 works. In the University of the Bahamas, 6 vertical archives, or files rather, and in the National Archives, only 4 biographies. And so you would understand my dismay and discouragement and sadness by this being all I found. And a lot of it wasn't necessarily central to the figures that I was interested in. They were loosely related, but this is what I found in that period. And so for me, here we have the kind of juxtaposition of, again, I find it so ironic that, not necessarily ironic for those of you that kind of follow the transnational kind of relationships, thinking about the archives, thinking about repatriation, thinking about how much of our identity lives outside of our home. And this is the kind of disparity here in these 2 kind of lists. And bear in mind, what I showed you was what I looked at in national institutions, but I also engaged in having conversations with historians, researchers. Again, that is a declining, and I know Dr. Turner's gonna look at me sideways, but it's a declining kind of field, right? Where are the archivists? They're kind of, I don't wanna say a dying generation, but it's a decline. And we only now are having a resurgence. Post-independence, we were excited. We were like, we got a national identity. We have to savor this moment. And now we forget. Yeah, we forget. It's amnesia. And so how do we rectify this? These are some of the stats based on the findings. And as you can see, the individuals, the oral histories, right? Those narratives, those conversations with one of the artists and the art educator's friend, right? Sister, cousin, those are meaningful, those are just as valuable as what you find in the archives because they're personal. They tell a part of a person's history that's not necessarily what the public knows, and that is helpful in our greater understanding of the individual. And that's just a kind of a glance at where these archival material exists. And so here I'm really looking at the 3 participatory kind of research threads that I approached in helping to, again, include a community with my research, so having co-collaborators. And oftentimes, I think, as academics, as scholars, we find discomfort or a slight awkwardness in engaging our students as collaborators. And in my research, I did just that. We were online, they were getting bored. I'm like, you know what, we're gonna fix that. And so this was after I came back from Massachusetts, and I assigned the students a final project of reclaiming their history. I didn't want to do a hypothetical assignment. I wanted them to find out about their own history. They were bored to death when they got the assignment. They were excited too much when they finished the assignment because they learned things about who they were and about that time that they didn't realize existed. And that is the power of the archive, teaching us about ourselves through learning about a history that has been silenced. And so I'm going to try and play this. Hopefully.
The goal of the IT overall is always engagement. We want as many persons as possible to engage in the national collection, your national collection, learn about the works, and have open.
Yeah, we'll just play a couple of seconds of it, but this is a presentation by one of the students in the class.
Good morning, everyone.
Showing her
Welcome to my
findings.
presentation on reclaiming Bahamian art history. I covered the months of April to June in the year 1965. So first up, I want to cover the theme of visual art. So I found in the articles there was the art and entertainment section, and it often featured and critiqued visual art and performances done by Bahamian youth in schools or other organizations. For example, this critiqued art exhibitions and performances done by students and alumni at St. John's College, and it praises visual artists such as David Hanna and musicians such as Marjorie Sawyer. The Nassau Festival of Arts was a grand event largely advertised and promoted throughout the month of April. It featured a wide variety of art forms, including visual art, dancing, music, theater, and even culinary arts. It had pottery demonstrations, painting exhibitions, luncheons, and choreographed performances by the Nassau Civic Ballet. The newspaper also
Pause it there, so I don't run out of time. Sorry, you know what I have to do behind there, you would applaud me. Go back to the presentation. Thank you. Okay, sorry about that. So basically what this student found out was that she realized later in her presentation that, and we talked about this in class, and so it was interesting that she revisited it, that a lot of our history is kind of based on the dominant narrative. And so Brent Malone is revered as one of the kind of founding fathers of Bahamian art. But if you look within the archives, he came up with a lot of Afro-Bahamian artists, but they weren't, the context in which they were written about, the trajectory, they were silenced. And so having the students learn about the work, find out about the work, and engage with it in this manner shows us the power of the archive as an educational tool and as a preservation tool. And so secondly, my engaging of the community myself is engaging art educators like Mrs. James O'Rourke, who paved the way for art education as a mentee to Horace Wright in the 70s. And this is him, and this is his personal archive. And these are the objects within his personal archive that probably don't exist in public archives, right? This is us finding about, I have an Independence book from 1973.
Wow.
Rare, right? Rare, just rare. And this is in his personal archive. And so how can we use this as a way to share knowledge, expand knowledge, to empower the public? And so this is a project, I won't link to it, but this is a project that I did at Penn State with the body there in our museum that is, let's say, 100% white. I am the 1%. And so I'm coming into this space as an individual, a Black woman who has been raised, I've lived in London for 11 years, but my footing, my grounding is in a predominantly Black country. So when I go there, I feel my race. I see and I feel my Blackness. And so what I do is I create this project where other international students are able to kind of voice their concerns and using the interpretation of art and making it more accessible to other students through language. And so really this is the power of the archive, the ability for us to use participation of the public, of the community, to then come back to empower their community. And we have a few case studies here. I'm just going to roll through them really quickly visually.
Really quickly.
Yes. This is the one here in the Bahamas. This is Historian and Beyond, storytelling, virtual archive. This is here, you should be familiar with the Digital Library of the Caribbean. And this here is the Smithsonian's project where they actually go into the communities and help families digitize. And this is the juxtaposition of institution and community. And so I'm going to just scroll through these quickly. These are my tenets of how we need to move forward. And thank you very much for your patience.
That was interesting, but we have to continue. Then you have 5 minutes if you have a question.
Engagement. So that's a little bit about
Like, how did they get to the topic that they chose, or why did you see the model?
So the parameters I used was, I based it off of what I kind of made it manageable. So it was a 4-week project, and they had a reel of microfilm to go through, which is essentially 3 months.
Did you select the topic? Or
And they had to choose between looking at the arts, so the visual arts, performing arts, because I think that that's important just to see the connectivity between them. And so they had a year that was assigned, but they then chose what it is that they wanted to talk about, what they found interesting, what they could then, if I had more time, what she found controversial, yeah? And so that really got them thought-provoking conversation, not just, I found this, I'm gonna present this, let's go home. No, how do you think that how is this bothering you, and how should it be addressed, and let's have a discussion about it so that we have a meaningful discourse. And so I think those discussions are important to allow students to be more critical thinkers. Anyone, questions?
Hi, I just wanted to know how you get your community to trust you with their legacies.
Again, meaningful relationships. So with James O'Rourke, spend a lot of time. So all of these projects, I'm engaged in one now. I need to clone myself, but you have to build relationships with them, and that's why I preface this by saying it's deeply personal. I cannot go to someone's house, take all of their personal archival material, go and scan it, dump it back off, and say, "See ya." It doesn't work that way. It's you get so attached to their story, to how their story can impact others, not just as individuals, but as communities. And building that trust, you are able to see, usually it takes about a month, to see whether or not they can trust you with their archival material. Because again, positionality, who I am, the dynamics of being a younger person, right? Because I'm dealing with people 80 plus, right? Who she thinks she is? She know what you're doing. Exactly.
Touch the
So
bottom,
those
right?
dynamics.
The bottom of
I
it.
gotta go soon anyway, so she gonna do it. But if you wanna have a further discussion, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be.
In the coffee break
Yes.
for the language, feel free to go to that because we have to move on. And thank you.